Hello and welcome. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Steph.
And we are your hosts for the Star Trek Deep Space Nine Parmach cast.
Parmach, of course, being the Klingon word for love.
Because on this podcast, we believe that love will save the world.
And that the Deep Space Nine crew are all in a massive polyamorous relationship web.
That too. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Star Trek Deep Space Nine Parmach cast. How are you doing today, Steph?
I'm doing just fine. Jamie, how about yourself?
I am doing pretty good. It's been a beautiful couple days here in San Diego. I got to go and meet Dylan Mulvaney the other night on their. They were here she was here doing an event for her book tour. So that was very cool. My best friend and I got to go to the San Diego Library, and what a funny, cool lady. I'm very excited to read her book.
That's so exciting.
Yeah. Anything exciting that you've been up to this weekend?
I went for a very nice nature walk with Peter earlier. We saw a butterfly that I had never seen before. It's a lotus green streak. We looked it up.
You're such a nerd.
Shout out to iNaturalist. Not a sponsored app promotion.
But it could be. Get in touch.
Yeah, iNaturalist. Hit us up.
Great. All right. Well, we are here today for episode 5 of the podcast to discuss Deep Space Nine, season 1, episode 5, Captive Pursuit.
Oh, yes.
What did you think of this episode, Steph?
I really liked it. I think it's a great play on, the most dangerous game, which we'll talk about. I'm also just biased because anything with O'Brien,
he's your boy. He's your man. He's your Irish hunk.
He's my Irish, my
your
Kerry Gold.
Yeah.
I love O'Brien. I love Colm Meaney. He's just so good. So anytime there's a lot of O'Brien, I am happy.
That's for you. Yeah, no, completely.
What about you?
I also really enjoyed it. I think it was fun for me to go back for the context of the podcast and pay a lot of attention to what was happening in this episode because I have an emotional memory of it as one that I really could take or leave, that it feels very early season 1, an alien shows up and some hijinks ensue. I just remember not caring about it a ton and getting to focus back in for the podcast and really having to be paying super close attention and taking notes and everything. I feel like I caught a lot more that I liked and thought was interesting than when I've just been casually watching it for entertainment in the past.
Yeah, you're looking at it with new eyes.
Exactly. And I think as much as I love O'Brien, his the O'Brien focused stories are not typically my favorites. I think I tend to find his star shining a little more when he's a supporting player in other stories, and so
I can see that.
It wasn't necessarily made for me in a lab the way it was for you, but I still had a good time.
No, we know which episode was made for me in a lab.
Yeah, that's true.
We'll get to that in a much later season.
Get to that in a couple of years. So very quickly before we get into our recap and discussion, let's break it down. What flavor of ep do we have going here?
So it's very lightly The Irishman Must Suffer.
Yeah, it definitely is framed around O'Brien having a series of mishaps and
emotions,
things that stress him out. Yeah, which are the hallmarks of an O'Brien Must Suffer.
Yeah, he's not suffering directly, which is sort of the more classic version of his episode, but there is vicarious suffering.
Yeah, it's not something happening to him in that way, but he has that quote where it's I sort of adopted him as soon as he came out, and so it is very much about his relationship with this character.
Yeah.
I also noted there's also, I don't know if we've talked about this one yet, but one we will see a lot with Deep Space Nine is the terrible hotel guests in space genre, where it's somebody shows up to the station and now we have to deal with it for 44 minutes and change. And it's very, that's the other intersection here, right? Is who's this lizard? What do you see doing on the promenade? And so Yeah, I think this is like a solid half and half between the two of those. A little like when you mix the vanilla and chocolate and the cone.
Got a beautiful swirl there.
Exactly. Okay, all right. So with that out of the way, let's dive in to our episode recap and discussion for Captive Pursuit. Directed by Corey Allen, teleplay by Jill Sherman Donner and Michael Piller. Release date January 30th, 1993, a Saturday. We're back on Saturday.
Yeah. So we open on Commander Sisko meeting in his office with Sarda, a Dabo girl at Quark's who complains that Quark has made repeated sexual advances toward her.
Yeah, okay, so we just gotta jump right in. This opening scene is wild. What the fuck is happening?
What is it doing in this episode?
Yeah, so she tells Sisko that she's tried to tell Quark to take a hike, but Quark claims that sex with him is part of her job and that he has had it written into her contract. And I just like genuinely, what in the hell is the point of this scene? I really don't understand why it's here. It doesn't connect in any way thematically to the rest of the episode on top of just being like obviously gross and unsettling.
Like I forgot that Quark sexually exploits and harasses his workers shows up so early. And two, I fucking hate every time they do that.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons.
Yeah. I guess if I was really to try and put myself into the shoes of the folks working on this episode, I guess you could say it's showing Ben settling into his leadership role on the station. And like, it's nice to know explicitly, I guess, that Ben takes issue with sexual harassment. But like, okay. So for one, why is this here to never be mentioned again in the episode, right? Like, why is that the first thing that happens if you're never going to follow up on it and have it mean anything?
Right out the gate, just sexual harassment.
Two, for an episode that later features Quark as like the fun, funny, open ear at the bar type character, why would you have a scene at the top of the episode that establishes him firmly as a sex pest?
Yeah.
Like, things like this will pop up every now and again with Ferengi characters on the show, and I just think it really hurts the character of Quark in particular, whose charm relies on him being, yes, a criminal, but someone who, although they're loath to admit it, is fundamentally not interested in hurting other people, right? And I do wonder if how this scene is read now versus, you know, it making it into the script as written then speaks to a sort of fundamental cultural shift in how sexual harassment is viewed that has come around in the last 30 years. Like, despite the fact that it obviously still happens all the time, we've gotten to a point, it feels like, as a society where we can at least acknowledge that sexual harassment is something bad that hurts people. And back then, it feels like there was an element of sort of treating it more like a punchline than anything else, like very Pepe Le Pew sort of thing. And that's the only thing I can imagine, is that you're genuinely not thinking about it as like a violent act with a victim that matters.
Yeah, it's so strange.
It's so bizarre.
And I really, really hate the way that sexual harassment and Quark are treated as comic relief.
Yes.
And like, you know, as we see the Ferengi more, we learn that they have, you know, a very misogynistic culture and very, you know, backwards views about women. And it's kind of played as this like, oh, haha, look at these backward, like, species. And
but
kind
they're
of
like the butt of the joke in those cases, right?
Yeah.
I feel like that's the point of that later on, is to show how regressive they are.
Yeah, and like, it's kind of in line with the line about plea bargaining in the pilot of like, oh, look at the Ferengi who do these old, outdated, like...
Right, Ferengi as a satire of like 20th century humans.
Exactly. But then it's also like, haha, he wrote sex into a contract.
Yeah.
And it's like,
make it make sense. Make it line up. Yeah, if you're gonna do something interesting with this character, and they will repeatedly show throughout the show that they're interested in Quark being like a likable character, someone that we have empathy for, someone. And so like, why
do you put this in?
And how do you think that your audience can possibly feel that way when this is also how you're presenting that character, right?
I think it's the biggest block for me in terms of Quark. Like, I want to like Quark.
Yeah.
But I'm like, he sexually harasses all his female employees.
Yeah,
and
I think it's
that.
the biggest block for Deep Space Nine generally, honestly. And it speaks to one of those things of like, I really, as someone who loves the show so much and knows that there's so many instances in the show where Quark is going to be used as a mouthpiece for like really interesting commentary. I wish I knew more about what happened in the writer's room, because it feels like there are certain specific voices pushing this like voice onto Quark that isn't there all the time, and I just wish that I could like know that for sure so I could sort of categorize it in my head. Because right now it just feels like you can't reconcile these discordant pieces of this character, right? So there's not really much more to say about it, but we just wanted to like get into that at the front because there's no reason that the scene needs to be here. It makes the entire episode worse for it being here, I think we can easily say. And
it's just a wild note to start on.
Yeah, and that there's so many people like that in the real world, and fuck those people, they should all be shot into space. And so like to then present Quark as someone who should not be shot into space is something that I take fundamental umbrage with. Anyways, Sarda leaves Cisco's office, and I did want to note, as much as I don't like the fact that this scene exists, I do really love how drag queeny Sarda is presented in like her gigantic curly wig and the forehead jewelry. It's almost like a little Chapel Roan with like the curly red. Like,
that's true.
She's a slay. I just hate what is happening to her.
Sarda herself, we're all about it.
Yeah, like bring her back, honestly, and have her castrate Quark. I would watch that episode.
Oh yeah.
So Sarda leaves, and Major Kira informs Cisco that something is coming through the wormhole.
In Ops, Cisco learns that a small alien starship has emerged from the wormhole.
And Dax has a line here, something like, the ship doesn't match anything in the Starfleet files, which, you know, makes sense because like we're going to learn it's coming from the Gamma Quadrant, but it just strikes me as funny because the model that they used for this starship is just a redress of a model used as a Vulcan ship, the T'Pau on TNG. So it very much should be familiar to you guys, but whatever, moving on.
But it's fine. So Cisco has O'Brien hail the ship, and we learn that the sole passenger is a terrified reptilian humanoid who hadn't even realized that he'd traveled to the Alpha Quadrant.
I don't know about you, but in these like op scenes, I just keep catching myself just like watching Kira in the background, and I just love her so much, and Nana is so good. Like the little like busy work that she finds for herself in these group scenes, I'm just like, mwah,
it's
love
so
it.
Good. Nana, an actor.
Truly. So, as it becomes clear that the alien's ship is in danger of exploding, he reluctantly agrees to allow O'Brien to bring the ship in with a tractor beam, using the beam's graviton field to reinforce the vessel's structural integrity. And I just had a question for you. I don't know if it's anything here, but how do we feel about O'Brien's repeated use of the phrase friend in this episode when referring to Tosk? Sorry, we haven't learned his name yet, but referring to this alien character that we're gonna meet, I find it cute, and like that's something that like I'm Quaker, and so like I and people that I know will use that a lot, like, oh friend, how's it going? But it's just a little strange how often it's repeated in this episode when it's never really particularly used as part of his lexicon before or after. I feel like I would at least appreciate if it felt something like the character regularly says.
Yeah, it definitely stood out because he repeats it at least like 2 or 3 times in this scene alone.
Yes, and then it's going to be like several more throughout the episode.
Which, yeah, it's not part of his normal language, and it's not something that I remember continuing at all.
It's just sort of very noticeable because of how often it's repeated, and it makes me wonder why someone was like pushing that pedal so hard in the writer's room, you know?
I mean, I made a note about just I love O'Brien kind of talking him through being scared. And so maybe he's trying to emphasize that they are friendly, that, you know, Universal Translator conveys this feeling of like, you are welcome. But I think we're meta-ing a little there.
I think that is a good observation, because I think that something subtextual that is really interesting about this episode is O'Brien as like a diplomatic figure, where I don't think O'Brien would ever think about it in those terms. Like he just sees it as like he's nice to people and he likes meeting new people and like stuff like that. But like there is a very interesting diplomatic angle to everything that O'Brien does in this episode, and similarly or in tied in with that, I feel like is how he sort of approaches like putting people at ease and like making it very clear that they're friends. Like, we're here to be friendly. You know, you don't need to fear, despite the fact that you are 90,000 light years from home and like all of that.
And terrified. Yeah.
So
dispensing with the official first contact procedures for the moment, Sisko orders O'Brien to greet the new arrival at the airlock alone so as to ease his fears and to hopefully find out what he's so nervous about.
And I do think that's sort of the start of that, like, diplomatic O'Brien, right? It's like he's taking on the diplomatic role here by officially, like, being the welcoming committee.
Yeah.
So O'Brien arrives at the docking port and opens up the airlock, only to find the ship apparently empty, despite the fact that the sensors indicate that the alien is still on board somewhere. And I love here how O'Brien like talks to himself. It sort of becomes a bit of a hallmark for the character down the line, and something we saw a bit of in Babel when he's, you know, oh, Chief, go fix this, Chief, go, you know. And it was just so fun to see that picked up here. They're really starting to get a handle on who these people are beyond just their roles on the station and in the narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. So O'Brien continues inspecting the ship when suddenly the reptilian alien materializes behind him. And I'm such a sucker for slapstick. Him smacking his head in surprise. It just got me so good.
There are so many good moments of that in here. Absolutely.
So good. And the two discuss the state of the ship. And while Miles doesn't recognize many of the system, he believes they should be able to fix it if the alien can walk him through the repairs.
Yeah. And Scott McDonald, who plays Tosk here, he just does such a great job with this new alien's mannerisms. Like, as he looks O'Brien up and down, it's so unlike the kinds of behavior we're used to within any typical social convention. It almost feels like, you know, am I looking at a person right now or some kind of animal or somewhere in between? And just really stellar character and physical work from this actor, I thought.
Agreed. Yeah, I made a note about he kind of sniffs O'Brien. Like, you know, he's kind of doing the like dog animal.
Absolutely.
Who is this person? It's great physical acting.
Really good. And so the alien tells Chief O'Brien that he is Tosk, and although he doesn't specify if this is his personal name or his species name, he's simply Tosk.
Much like Cher.
Yeah, exactly. Cher, Pink, all of that. As the two of them are exiting the ship and walking towards the promenade, O'Brien asks him about how his ship was damaged, but Tosk tells him that the damage is just, you know, a result of turbulence coming through the wormhole. And
classic.
I don't think O'Brien believes that for a second, but as they cross out onto the promenade, there's this moment where the airlock ring sort of lights up and it freaks Tosk out, and O'Brien goes, oh yeah, that's just the security sensor, it's just picking up my phaser. And one, you've been struck by foreshadowing. But two, wow, these security sensors that can detect weapons on people coming aboard are such a good idea. I wonder why we've never seen them before and we'll never see them again.
Don't worry about it.
I was genuinely like, that's a great idea. Someone should use that.
Someone should use those like all the time.
Anyways.
So I want to note again, just I love how patient O'Brien is. Like, he's impatient when he's being hassled like 24/7, like in Babel, but with someone who's new and, you know, he's scared, like he has this patience.
Yeah.
And then also he's like, okay, I have work to do. Like, man's like, I do need to.
It does sort of, it feels like it brings out his fundamental Starfleet nature in a way that O'Brien doesn't always get to show, because he is more of like that, like, working class character that like is often used to sort of juxtapose to the officers, and so he doesn't get to play that part as much. But this man's a 20-year veteran of Starfleet.
Yeah.
Like, he knows about contact with new species, about like engaging through empathy, and like I like that we get to show that here, where it's like this is a fundamental part of all of these people, and that's why they are in Starfleet.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So as O'Brien and Tosk are walking the promenade, Tosk observes everything with great interest. He does a little kind of like getting into Bashir's space and sniffing at him too, which is great. He asks about the station population, and we learn that approximately 300 people live aboard DS9.
Which is kind of fewer than I would have thought.
I honestly don't think I ever thought about it.
No, yeah. I mean, I guess it makes sense because like the majority of what goes on in the station is people coming and going, not people that live there full time, but it's huge. So I was struck by that.
It's a big old city. So O'Brien explains to Tosk that the Federation and Starfleet have a mission to seek out new life and that they're really excited to meet more new species from the Gamma Quadrant. And that seems to really surprise Tosk.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of wild that it's taken until episode 5 to feature an alien from the Gamma Quadrant. Like that.
Like the quadrant's just been vibing there.
Yeah, yeah. And Miles has this line here where he's explaining to Tosk, like Tosk is asking, what's the point of this station? And he says to him, well, I guess our real job is to keep an eye on the wormhole. And I feel like it sort of makes it stand out how much that has not really been an element of the last several episodes, but we're getting into it now, and that's what matters.
And now it's not getting Bajor ready for entrance into the Federation.
Right.
Now
which
we're here
is
for the
line
wormhole.
from Picard that we had in the pilot. Yeah. Which, to be fair, was the line in the pilot before the discovery of the wormhole. So that is something notable, is that the discovery of the wormhole in the pilot drastically changes what this outpost and this assignment end up being. But that is interesting to note.
Yeah. Also, O'Brien refers to DS9 as a flea market for the sector, and I'm like, that's a pretty apt description.
Yes, 100%.
What's going on in Deep Space Nine? It's a grab bag, dude.
I want to meet like the weird old ladies selling homemade jewelry on the promenade. I would like that to have more focus. So the conversation between O'Brien and Tosk is briefly interrupted with Quark loudly ejecting a Bolian woman from the bar for cheating at Dabo, which seems to sort of confuse and concern Tosk. And Miles picks up on that awkwardness of the moment and tries to sort of make a joke out of it. And I wondered, is this beat maybe supposed to be a follow-up on that heinous cold open scene? Like, Quark is an embarrassment to Starfleet and Miles has to keep their pet sex pest that they can't evict because the bar is rent controlled away from the guests. Like,
I guess
that's probably too generous of a reading, honestly. But
you are very generous in your heart and soul to the writing of
I'm
Deep
really
Space
just
Nine.
trying to make it make sense. Like, that's where I'm sitting. But I guess that there is sort of a generosity there in assuming that it makes sense.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta not give the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
I just love the idea that the bar is rent controlled.
Oh, I mean, it's gotta be, right? Otherwise, he's out of here before this, for sure. So Miles also asked Tosk about himself, whether, he's an explorer or some kind of scientist. But again, all he's going to give him is that he is Tosk. That's all he's interested in sharing.
So O'Brien shows Tosk to the guest quarters, and Tosk is very eager to get started on the repairs and explains to Miles that he requires only 17 minutes of sleep per day. He also explains that he has no need for the food replicator and that liquid nutrients are stored throughout his body.
Yeah. And I kind of find this like water cooler small talk about interspecies differences to be very, very cute. And Colm Meaney and Scott McDonald are doing a really great job building up a sort of strange chemistry between these two very different men across these bizarre interactions. Like, it doesn't really look or sound anything like anything we're used to, and yet you can really feel the camaraderie starting to develop. It's pretty
really
cool.
Just a great job by both actors.
Yeah.
I also just love Miles's line, "I wasn't the decorator."
Yeah. He's really in his like Abbott and Costello moment in this episode.
He really... We'll talk about it more when it comes up later, but O'Brien loves to do like a bit.
He really loves a bit. I also think that there's really funny, something funny. He's telling him about, if you want to get food, here's the replicator, blah, blah, blah. And there's just something really amusing about the mental image of Miles O'Brien slaving away inside these ridiculous Cardassian replicators trying to get a bowl of oatmeal, probably the simplest food imaginable.
Hey, oatmeal's very important to the Irish people. That is.
Is that what it is? Is it like an Irish hallmark?
Like the whole like steel cut Irish oatmeal?
Oh, okay. So I was missing that cultural component.
Yeah.
Then. Okay.
That's
Steph
crucial.
is our like Irish suffering correspondent, and so there's gonna be lots of moments where I'm just like lacking that important cultural context.
Listen, the famine. Let's start in 1800.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so with that making more sense than it did,
O'Brien goes to leave, and Tosk thanks him. Once Miles leaves, however, Tosk uses the view screen in his quarters to access a map of the station, and then specifically where the station's weapons are stored. which
yeah.
mildly worrying.
Yeah,
Don't love that.
I know it's probably a little invasive for Starfleet because they generally like to let people do whatever they want, but damn, could we not like set up a Google alert for when someone uses the literal station computer to search for things like where do they keep the weapons? Like, you think you could just have that ping security?
How to build a nuclear bomb, like, and also like maybe don't let the computer talk about that. Like, shouldn't there be some settings that are different for guest quarters versus like crew quarters?
Yeah, like you would think that like just the crew that works there gets like a fully detailed station map of everything, like everyone else could do with like a mall directory version.
Yeah, like
right?
simple. Here's floor 1, floor 2. Like,
yeah, like the promenade, the areas that are open to the public. But that's not how Starfleet rolls.
No,
all information is accessible to everyone,
very
and we
trusting.
just do our best to make sure people don't abuse it. So we cut to Sisko's office where Benjamin and Miles are sort of debriefing about Tosk, and Miles alludes to sort of a suspicion that while friendly, Tosk seems to be on the run from someone or something. O'Brien also says he knows that Tosk was lying about the damage to his ship, that it was definitely caused by weapons fire. Sisko orders Miles to keep a closer eye on Tosk as long as he remains on the station.
And we cut to back aboard Tosk's ship. He and O'Brien are repairing the damage, continuing to bond, and they're teaching each other new things, including the human phrase, piece of cake. Yeah. Miles tries to crack a joke, but Tosk is just really struggling to understand, like, Miles' sense of humor. And Miles suggests that he buy Tosk a drink as they leave the ship, and Tosk is intrigued by the notion.
Yeah.
This is what I was talking about before. Like, he tells Tosk, you're the most natural straight man I've met in ages. And, like, O'Brien he loves a bit. He loves to be cracking a little joke.
And I just find it really amusing how relentlessly O'Brien keeps trying to make jokes with Tosk, fully knowing that this lizard man has no idea what the fuck he's talking about. Like, these are entirely for his own benefit at this point. He's just cracking himself up.
He kills himself.
Which, like, I guess we really can't judge because we're just sitting here doing that.
Truly, this podcast is just a vehicle for bits.
Miles O'Brien would love to be on this podcast, I have to think.
I think the man he'd sit back and, like, crack open a synth ale, and he was born to yap.
Too bad we are across time and space. And so Miles and Tosk, they go to Quark's to get that drink, where Tosk observes that the humans and the species like them seem to have too much downtime going on. And I just said, all right, Jeff Bezos. Don't trust this lizard man.
He's like, have you heard of capitalism?
Yeah.
Also, I just have to comment on Colum. Our fucking, like, Irishman, Irish R's.
Yeah,
so good.
His accent is so interesting in this show because it's not. I mean, like, in your opinion, does it feel Irish?
Oh yeah, very much so.
Okay. Because I feel like my like frame of reference for like that is too Lucky Charms, and so like I'm not used to like the more like subtle intonations that he has.
How actual Irish people speak.
Yeah.
That's fair.
But it's like it's so I can't replicate it. Like I mean, I'm sure you've all noticed I can't do a Miles voice.
You should give yourself a little credit.
Oh,
like,
well,
I hear it. But,
okay.
I find that Irish accents are extremely hard to do.
Like a real one. Yeah.
Similarly to Scottish, I really struggle trying to do like a Scotty vibe.
That's fair. I had someone tell me once that it's like there's a vowel shift that makes Scottish easy or easier. It's like when it would be an E, it's an I or something like that. I'll check it, but it's we may come back with a really good Scottish accent next week. We'll see.
Watch this space. So Tosk notes how very different he and O'Brien are. Quark attempts to find a way to make a profit off Tosk. He offers him a visit to a holosuite, but Tosk claims to live the greatest adventure of all, and that really impresses Quark.
Yeah.
O'Brien tries to ask him about this adventure, and Tosk says he can't talk about it.
I really love Tosk's extremely genuine delivery on the line, I'm sorry, I have no vices for you to exploit. Like, he's just trying to be nice to these strangers and, like, hears that, like, this guy wants to exploit his vices. And he's like, oh, man, like...
I wish I could help you with that.
I don't drink. I don't have sex. This is just... He's going to be so sad. And yet again, I just have to hit this note. What does this episode want from Quark? O'Brien's line here alludes to him mostly being skeezy and exploitative, which tracks with, the characterization in the opening scene. But I don't know. It still feels like this episode wants us to think of him in a favorable light.
Yeah.
And after the opening establishing him as a sex pest, it just feels kind of crazy.
It does. Make it make sense.
Yeah. And the mugs. The mugs in this scene.
It's
that is
your
exactly
mug.
my mug.
Yes.
Which, after talking about it last week, I felt badly. I realized I should have plugged where people can find the mug out there. So if you are interested in having your very own Deep Space Nine Quarks Synthale, Ractigino, whatever mug, the brand is Hot Joe, and the mug is the High Wave travel mug, and so they have it in all of these different colors, and they're great. I've really loved mine. So this is not sponsored; they're not paying us or anything. But if you want one, that's where I got mine. So
maybe we can drop a link in the
something
Twitter
like that, because it's pretty great. So, anyways, we cut to ops where the girls are having a key as O'Brien updates the other senior officers on the Toss situation. And I really, really love how Julian's only lines in this episode are attempting to insert himself into the situation. He has this, well, people tell doctors things they wouldn't ordinarily tell anyone else. And simply no one's listening. And they just continue on the conversation without acknowledging him. And I just had the twink gets fucked by Garrick in a coat closet one time, and suddenly he thinks he's James Bond.
I also just love the line, people tell doctors things they wouldn't tell anyone else. I'm like, girl, what? Like, that's not a thing.
Do you think Tosk has herpes? Is that what we're trying to like? Because otherwise I don't know what.
STI.
Yeah.
Like, also, just like, I don't know. I don't think people go to the doctor and think, I'm going to share things with this person.
And if they start asking you like invasive personal questions, I don't know. I don't know what Julian thinks he's doing here, but he's just a baby twink. He's got a lot to learn.
He's a little guy. And as O'Brien speaks, it becomes increasingly obvious that he's become attached to Tosk. And we both put in our notes that, like, Tosk gives good vibes. Miles is like, he passed the vibe check.
Yeah, Tosk gives good vibes and has never seen Law & Order Criminal Intent. Because he says no criminal intent there. And so while Sisko's, remaining somewhat suspicious of their guest, with the repairs to his ship scheduled to be completed the following day, Ben opts just to leave it up to Tosk whether to tell O'Brien the truth about himself before he departs. And I really enjoy how commanding and decisive Ben is in this episode. I think as someone who struggles a lot with just, making the right decisions, hello, anxiety, my old friend, it's just extremely satisfying to watch someone trustworthy do those calculations and make a quick decisive call. It's very you and I have talked off mic many times about Star Trek essentially as competency porn, right? Like how fun it is to watch someone just be so good at their job, what they do. And with Ben in particular, that job being like leadership, that's just always really fun to watch, I think.
I agree. And so we cut to a darkened corridor where Tosk tampers with a terminal screen, attempting to access a weapons locker. The painting on the wall behind Tosk turns out to be Goo, who asks him, what the fuck are you doing? And what the fuck is this painting?
Oh my god. Okay, so this is the absolutely buck wild ugliest painting I've ever seen in my life. Just hanging in the middle of this darkened corridor.
He couldn't be like a lamp or like a something normal
something
on the wall?
To brighten up the space a little bit. But okay, so my other thing about this was, did Odo paint that himself? Probably he just turned into a real painting he's seen before, but I much prefer the headcanon that Odo secretly loves turning into furniture, decor, etc., because it, allows him to express himself artistically in the only ways he knows how. And honestly, this does feel like the really kind of gritty, grim, goth teenage art that Odo would be painting.
It's like a weird sort of it's got kind of a tribal cave vibe, and there's a mouth and yeah.
I mean, it's been a day or two since I watched it, but my memory of it is that
it's weird.
It's weird. It's I remember it feeling like The Fall. The Fall from Grace, just
he could do a nice still life of flowers or something.
No. Which, I mean, I guess to be fair, Odo's never lived anywhere with flowers, which sad.
That is sad. But there are flowers on DS9. Like, he sees
Yeah,
them.
like flowers growing, I guess I mean. But yeah, no, that's a good point.
But anyway.
Tosk tries to turn invisible and run away, but Odo deploys security force fields at either end of the corridor to trap Tosk. And he does this, like, karate hands pose at Odo when he turns invisible that is simply incredible.
It's so good.
And I like to think he has to do the karate hands to turn invisible. Like, it triggers it somehow. It's like, jazz hands.
Yeah, I just put fight pose. Like, he's ready. And so Tosk, trapped, insists that he was accessing the weapons locker to prepare, but won't say more than that. Odo takes Tosk into custody.
Yeah. And so we cut to Tosk in the holding cell. He's visited by Sisko, O'Brien, and Odo. And despite their best efforts to find out more about him, who he's running from, all of that, the alien still seems to think that the fact that he is Tosk explains everything. And so, they're seeing, all right, we're not going to get any more out of him. So Sisko just orders Odo to keep Tosk locked in the holding cell and saying that they'll just have to wait and see if someone comes looking for him.
Yep. Just wait it out. I also just love Odo, like, have you committed crimes? Like, classic sneaky interrogation technique there. Did you be gay to crime?
Well, it's also funny because, like, I don't know that would be effective in, like, a monocultural context, but especially in the context of, like, you don't know what's considered a crime to his people. I just find that very interesting.
You have no... Well, here's Odo with his, like, I know what a crime is.
Right. His indomitable sense of the singularity of justice.
Yes. So Sisko and Odo leave, and Miles makes this an emotional appeal to Tosk based on their, fledgling bond.
Mm-hmm.
Even with the others gone, however, Tosk can't or won't bring himself to tell Miles more about his predicament. He simply asks Miles to let him die with honor.
Yeah, and I really love how O'Brien, he has absolutely no context about this guy's life, his species, or their society, the experiences that led him to DS9, any of that. And he still says so incredulously, who would want to kill you, Tosk? I feel like it really just speaks to the man that Chief O'Brien is. He's a straight shooter who's not afraid to go off of his instincts. And from his perspective, Tosk is a nice guy. Who would possibly want to hurt a nice guy?
Yeah, who would have an issue with you, buddy?
Yeah.
I also just Column's face acting in this scene.
So good.
Heartbreaking. I'm just the Irishman must suffer.
The Irish suffering is strong with this one. And so on his way out of security, O'Brien admits to Odo that he feels, partially responsible, being that he was the one that talked Tosk into coming aboard DS9. And here we have the first appearance of the detention area at the back of Odo's office. I think that this was just like previously a wall. And I wanted to flag it because I just love establishing more of the interior of the station and which spaces connect to which other spaces. Because the sets, the detention area and the Odo security office sets probably aren't actually connected, but I love that they're showing us like there is a door in the back of Odo's office that leads into this other set. It just helps with building a framework for how the station actually looks and feels in world. And I love just building out the world that way.
This is also where the line that you mentioned earlier, I sort of adopted it.
Yeah.
Brian is like, is anyone going to adopt this nice alien? And he doesn't wait for an answer.
And that will not be the last time, listeners. O'Brien's suffering often comes from his desire to be a foster parent.
It's his instinct.
Yeah, and that's, more power to him. More people who are good people should foster. So just as tricky when it's like an alien that you have no cultural context for. So outside the station, the wormhole opens up and a new ship emerges. In Ops, Dax reports to Sisko that the ship's ion signature matches that of Tosk's ship, so we know that they're coming from the same area. And the occupants of this new ship are not responding to Sisko's attempt to hail them, and instead scan the station with some sort of modulated particle beam. As the aliens attempt to beam aboard, Sisko orders the shields raised, but the aliens bombard the shields with some sort of radiation that just knocks them right out of commission.
I really love here how Kira's like, ready shields! And Ben's like, Kira, please calm down. And then like 3 seconds later, he's like, okay, yeah, you're right, go shields.
It feels very when Shax is like, can I detonate the warp core? And they're like, not now, Shax. But finally he gets to. The aliens beam on board the promenade, which, by the way, these aliens beam in effect sucks. I don't know if I made a note about that, but like it looks terrible. I try to not be too rude, but like what are we going for here? That's not... Anyways, They're interrupted by Odo and a security team, and Cisco, Kira, and Odo arrive, and the two groups face off from across the promenade.
They start snapping.
I really enjoy these Man Ray looking motherfuckers, to be honest. Like, they're
Great
schnazzy
design.
red. Yeah, it's fun.
I love a sparkly beep boop sash. Like, there's jewels happening.
You could just imagine, like, the moment where, like, they submitted the first version of this and someone was like, how will they know it's advanced technology if there aren't little sparkly beep boops everywhere? And I think it actually has the effect of making it look less advanced, but it's still cool.
It's great. I also just love that as Cisco, Kira, and Odo arrive, like, Ben is just this very, like, calm walk off the, lift thing. Kira's strutting.
She's going.
Walking with purpose. I just love her.
Only way she knows how to walk.
Truly. So Cisco orders the aliens to put down their weapons. They ignore him. As Odo approaches to attempt to disarm them, one of the aliens hits him across the face, knocks him to the ground, and it starts a brief skirmish. Kira and the others fire phasers on the aliens, but an unknown technology in their armor appears to absorb or disrupt the energy.
Yeah, and there's a really sick moment in this fight where Kira, she sort of fires her phaser at one of the aliens, but the angle of the beam causes it to cut across the right side of the camera, and it's like when you're on a plane that flies through a cloud and you're suddenly, like, inside the cloud. It's like we're actually partially seeing from inside the phaser beam and seeing the energy sort of cascade along it at different opacities, and it just looks really cool. I wonder, they did a great job framing that shot.
Yeah. Odo realizes that they're after the prisoner, Tosk, and vows that no one will abduct a prisoner from his brig while he's alive. Kira offers a phaser to Odo to help defend himself, but Odo declines, commenting that she knows he never uses them.
Yeah.
Eventually, one of the alien hunters manages to blast open the doors to security with his weapon, and they make their way into the detention area. And this is the first time that we encounter Odo saying, "No, I don't use weapons."
Yeah.
And I think it's a really interesting character choice.
I agree. I always thought it was a smart choice to have Odo never use weapons, and I think I enjoy that we get it established really early on here in this episode. And although I have to imagine it definitely wasn't the intention, given the just, different cultural framework for that conversation that we're in this moment versus 30 years ago. I think it really changes Odo's relationship to the concept of policing to have him completely reject lethal force as part of his security work. And, part of that is like he can afford to because he's almost unkillable. But still, it's a nice touch for what his presence as a instrument of the state on the station, what the implications of that are, right? He's not killing people. He's not even carrying something that would let him do that.
So inside, the holding cells appear to be empty, but one of the alien hunters projects a beam from a device on his helmet, which allows him to penetrate Tosk's invisibility screen.
It's like a little cuttlefish light on his helmet.
It is. And it shows that Tosk has not left his cell. He's in his little ready pose.
He's got his karate hands up.
He's got his karate hands up. And Tosk makes himself visible again, just as Cisco, O'Brien, and Odo come rushing in.
Yeah. And so the alien hunter calls his comrades and informs them, "I have Tosk alive. It is over." And the other two aliens out of the promenade beam away in their stupid beam. In the detention area, the remaining alien hunter takes off his helmet and he starts to berate Tosk, calling him a disappointment for allowing himself to be caught and caged, and leading to a very boring conclusion for this hunt. And I did just note the alien hunter, played by Garrett Graham, who would go on to play the rogue Q, Quinn, in Star Trek Voyager.
Nice. We love a little cross-track guy.
He was also one of the folks, along with Andy Robinson, who plays Garrick, who was up for the role of Odo. So it was like the three of them that were
cool.
the contenders.
Love that. Also, he has hair.
Yeah,
so we have
he does.
reptiles with hair, part 2.
Yeah. We'll get into this more in Design Corner, but I couldn't tell if they were supposed to be reptilian or what the deal is. But
I get a reptilian vibe.
Yeah, definitely, at least vibes-wise, for sure. And so Cisco, putting the pieces together, confronts the alien hunter and asks him straight up if this whole ordeal has really just been a hunt with Tosk as the fucking prey. And the hunter announces that Tosk will be brought home alive to be put on display like a zoo animal, the greatest humiliation a Tosk can know. And there's this moment here that I really like where the hunter sort of has this like visceral physical shudder of disgust as he's talking about, you know, Tosk's failures and taking him home to be put on display like that. And it's just a very effective little bit of characterization and contextualization for the culture that created and permitted this hunt. You know, as much as from our perspective we view them as like pretty disgusting for their like lack of sensitivity or value for sentient life, just showing the ways to which their cultural framework really is like what they believe on a visceral level. It's not just an excuse to do violence to other people. It really is something that like they hold dear and is important to them on a cultural level. I just think it makes the conversation about what this is much richer.
I think it's really interesting that Tosk says earlier that the Alpha Quadrant species have too much downtime versus this hunt is not for survival. It's not for, you know, to feed, to whatever.
Yeah.
This is entertainment.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to the culture, clearly, but like your downtime should be spent doing what? Doing something like this?
Right.
Like,
no, that is a really, really interesting catch. And also, like, these moments really make me have a lot of questions and a lot of wondering about what their culture looks like.
Yes.
I think something that comes up for me a lot with this episode, something that, like, very much didn't exist yet at the time that it aired, is the Hunger Games. Because it feels
I thought of the Hunger Games, too.
You know, it feels very, like, the Capitol, we're doing this blood sport for fun, but it is very much about not only survival in the context of trying to stay alive, but also survival in the context of trying to like live and survive and like maybe thrive under the boot of fascism, right? And like what that looks like. Yeah, it just, I have a lot of questions about like what their home world looks like and what it's like, because it does feel like it's like, well, Tosk had spent his entire life training for this, right? But like, do non-Tosks of this species sleep more than 17 minutes a day? And if they do the Tosks know that? Or do they think that those things are universal across their species? And I don't know.
No, and I was thinking about it, again, from the Hunger Games perspective of, like, how often is there a hunt?
Yeah.
How do you get chosen to be the hunter?
Are these people government? Are they, like, private billion? Is this, like, an Elon Musk kind of situation, like, going out and fighting, killing people for sport, as I'm sure he does?
Probably.
You know.
It's, like, 99%
I can't
sure.
prove that, so don't sue me. Anyways,
it raises a lot of very interesting questions about their homeworld and how this culture formed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that hunter, you know, he commands that Sisko needs to release Tosk, but Ben's not going to allow it, telling him that if they try and take Tosk by force, he's just going to open fire on their ship. He's not fucking around at this point.
I'm sorry, just more column face acting. Like, he just, it hurts.
Yeah, he does a great job. It's really,
He does.
In Sisko's office, Benjamin and the hunter are continuing to argue over the morality of hunting another sentient being, even if he was bred specifically to be hunted. And the hunter explains that Tosk's entire existence is based around the hunt, that he exists for the sole purpose of making it exciting and interesting, as exciting and interesting of a game as possible. And I think it underscores the most dangerous game of it all, which we'll talk more about what that is in Final Analysis if you're not familiar. But just that the whole point being that he's sentient, that he has the wherewithal to deceive and sort of fight tooth and nail for his life in a way that beings without sentience like don't have that same creativity. I just found that very interesting.
Yeah. I also just love Avery Brooks's delivery here of, I comprehend just fine.
So good.
Like, you can hear the periods. It's so good. And so Ben states firmly that he and Starfleet do not tolerate the abuse of any life form, and the hunter is shocked. He shares that their culture doesn't see the hunt as abusive, but rather as an exercise in honoring Tosk, who he claims represents all that is noble and courageous in his culture.
So we get basically a classic Star Trek cultural conflict here, where it's like we clearly, from our position, are meant to empathize more with the Federation's position, but there is a genuine, they take the time to underscore that, like, this isn't just we are being cruel for cruelty's sake. There is actually, like, a cultural underpinning to this, and that doesn't make it not cruel, but in terms of how we're having the debate, it's not from a place of moral objectivity in any way. So the hunter concedes that the Alpha Quadrant will just, it's going to be out of bounds for the hunt for the future. No one can go through the wormhole. That way we don't have to deal with this culture conflict anymore. And he's, all right, we're going to make that a rule. And in exchange, I need you to release Tosk to us before we, and so beams back to his ship. And there's this great moment where he sort of like gives Ben like a talk to the hand, as you noted, but he's got this sparkly Michael Jackson glove that I just really love.
It's really good. And so in Ops, Sisko announces his decision that Tosk will be released to the Hunters, citing the Prime Directive. And Kira asks about asylum for Tosk, and Sisko states it will be granted only if Tosk asks.
I love that was so few lines in this episode for Kira. This is one of them. It's not a story about her, but this line is so in keeping with her character and what her perspective on all of this would be. Like, it's very Tana Los in certain ways, right? She always be trying to get asylum for bitches. Like, that's just her, like, her oeuvre. That's what she lives for. And the look that Miles and Kira share here is just nothing short of excellent. So Nana Visitor, the woman that you are.
Truly.
Whew.
So O'Brien runs to Tosk in the holding cell and tells him to request asylum. And even though Tosk appreciates the crew's efforts to help him, he refuses, saying it goes against everything that he believes in, and that his fundamental purpose is to outwit the Hunters for another day, to survive until I die with honor.
Yeah, so we're finally getting from Tosk's own perspective, from his own words, the way that this is important to him. It's not just the Hunters saying, oh, he loves it. No, he loves getting shot at. Trust us.
It's favorite.
And I think that is interesting that they go out of their way to include that, right? It really complicates the morality of the situation.
Yeah. And, it complicates the question of, like, if Tosk has been raised to do this from birth.
Yes.
And we'll talk about this.
Can you really say that he's choosing this in any real way? Yeah. I mean, very similar to, like, the Hunger Games, right? Where you have the careers who volunteer from Districts 1 and 2, and it's a lifelong goal of theirs, and so people sort of look at it as, well, they are not being victimized in the same way that we are. And it's like, well, they're being victimized by the system, certainly, even if they're not being victimized by the other tributes in the same way.
So we cut to Quark's, where a thoroughly disgruntled Chief O'Brien is having a drink.
He's got his High Wave Hot Joe mug and pouring his sorrows into it.
And Quark tries to get Miles to talk about what's bothering him. And Miles is, protesting, but eventually he gives in and he explains the whole situation with Tosk. And
he can't help himself. He loves to talk, even though he thinks he doesn't.
He loves to yap. Very Irish. As he talks, Miles has an apparent epiphany without ever letting Quark get a word in edgewise. And he rushes off to, quote, change the rules.
Just gotta say, Armin Shimmerman as Quark is actually so good and so funny in this scene. It just makes me more confused about why we started the episode the way we did. Like, if this is the moment that you had Quark be in the episode 4, which, like, it is, this is the first moment that Quark actually matters to the story. If this was going to be his moment to shine, why have a whole scene characterizing him as a sex pest? Make it make sense.
It doesn't make sense. Yeah.
And O'Brien's epiphany face is so devilishly wonderful. Like, Colm really let himself chew the scenery a little bit with this moment, and it's really so excellent because he's usually, I find him to be a little bit more muted often than some of the other actors, and this time he really let himself, like, kind of go wild with that look, and it's great.
Yeah. Also, at an earlier scene with Tosk and O'Brien in Quark's, Quark objects to being called Barkeep.
Oh, yeah.
And Miles, throughout the rest of the episode, continually calls him Barkeep.
Come on, Barkeep. Let's,
to annoy him. And it's excellent.
Especially in his accent.
Yes.
In the security office, O'Brien claims that Sisko has ordered him to escort Tosk and the Hunter to their ship. And so Odo, of course, immediately heads towards Sisko office to complain. And with him gone, O'Brien claims that he must escort the Hunter off the station rather than transporting them as a sign of respect. He's like, we're giving you an escort. We're rolling out the red carpet. So on their way out the door, he removes and leaves his comm badge on Odo's desk.
Tusk looks really, really sad about O'Brien's change of heart.
I hadn't noticed that.
He looks crestfallen. His head
so
bows, and it's such an interesting
interesting.
thing because he's telling O'Brien, like, this is what I want. This is, my role. But he looks very, very sad about
Well,
this.
that is something that I think is really interesting about this episode. I mean, we're not to get too deeply into something else that we're about to talk about, but like O'Brien really to get back to like the diplomatic element of O'Brien that I was talking about earlier, I don't think that this is his intention in any way, but O'Brien's actions really lead to everyone having a better ending than they would otherwise, to everyone getting what they want more than they would have otherwise. And so in this case, Tusk, it could be just about like him being sad that O'Brien has sort of changed his perspective or like is not maybe seeing their friendship in the same way that he was before. But it also could just be that Tusk he wants to still be being hunted, right? Like he doesn't want to be going back to be a zoo animal.
Yeah,
and so even though that's his preference to getting asylum, his number one preference and the hunter's number one preference would just be that none of this DS9 bullshit ever happened and that they just like get to finish their hunt, right?
I also just love the way O'Brien just like yeets his comm badge onto the desk. Fuck it, we ball.
It's always such a good moment. That's like a beat that will happen in a few episodes throughout the series where like we're going off the record. We're going like Starfleet, I no longer represent Starfleet.
YOLO swag
I'm,
ever.
Like, fucking around and I'm finding out and it's always good. I love a comm badge off moment.
So good. So Odo arrives in Sisko's office to complain, only to find that Ben has no idea what he's talking about.
Yep.
Ben attempts to hail the chief, but only reaches, of course, his recently discarded comm badge.
Mm-hmm. And so on the promenade, O'Brien, the hunter, and Tusk reach the airlock entrance, and I just said the hunter walking Tusk by his leash down the promenade. I can't stop thinking about that picture that went viral a while back of that goth girl in the platform boots walking her boyfriend around in a pup mask around the supermarket on a leash. Like, it's very that kind of like kinky energy, and everyone's like, what's happening here?
What is this?
Anyway,
we'll tweet the photo for all of you.
Yeah, definitely. And so as the hunter enters the airlock, the power grid overloads and knocks him off his feet. Taking the hunter down with a punch to the jaw, O'Brien leads Tusk to the second level of the promenade, and below, the hunter hails his colleagues and informs them the hunt has resumed.
And I just love that, like, no phaser, just get punched, idiot. Like, good old brawl. Just
And there's this moment where a hunter beams in right in front of Miles, and Tusk leaps over Miles's head, wiggling his legs, and lands right on top of the hunter. It's so good. It's so funny. And it reminds me of my best friend, Rowan, when we play pickleball, when somebody knocks the ball right at their feet, that like when they don't have time to get out of the way, they do this little like jump up in the air to avoid it. And it reminded me of that so much. I just had to note that.
It's a great physical moment.
I think Tusk would be great at pickleball.
There's only one way to find out. So in ops, Kira relays a report of the fight on the promenade, tells Ben it sounds like Miles let Tusk loose. Odo immediately heads off to find them, but Ben tells Odo not to hurry. And after a brief pause, Odo continues on at an almost leisurely pace towards the turbo lift out of ops.
I almost want him to like start whistling as he was. Initially, when I was doing the recap, I thought that at first Odo just didn't understand what Sisko was saying, but no, he understands the entire time. That look, I just think is a sort of shock that this is what Sisko's down for, and then almost maybe a respect, right? And it makes me curious about where this whole situation fits into Odo's internal compass on justice, right? Like, because we never get his words on it, but he almost certainly has an opinion on like
Odo has opinions on everything.
Yes, absolutely.
So O'Brien and Tusk make their way through the station via the, quote, conduits. They're the Jeffries tubes.
Yeah.
O'Brien uses his phaser to free Tusk from the collar the hunters put on him. The intimacy of removing your bros bond. It's intimate. It's
You're never going to get
homoerotic.
dog walked around that supermarket again, buddy. Let's go.
You're free. The two of them drop from the ceiling into a corridor, knocking out a hunter below them and stealing his weapon. Three more materialize at the end of the corridor and open fire. Tosk dodges and fires back, taking out all three of the hunters. And I love when Tosk is like, now you are Tosk as well, O'Brien.
That's a great moment. It's so good.
It's so good.
And I know that in a minute that these guys are going to get back up and continue the hunt, but their bodies sure are smoking here. And these guns also literally blasted a hole in a wall earlier, so...
Maybe they have settings.
Yeah, or maybe the Man Ray suits are just, like, really durable.
Yeah.
I don't know, but they're lucky. They're lucky in this
I'm
moment.
also curious, like, is Tosk allowed to kill the hunters?
That's a great question. I think he must be, because he definitely shoots at them.
That's how there would be stakes,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
So, arriving at the ship, Tosk stores his stolen weapon above the pilot's seat and asks O'Brien if he would like to join him. O'Brien declines. He's like, among other things, I've got a wife and a daughter that would not probably fit well into this lifestyle.
Not so much.
And Tosk asks O'Brien if he's going to get in trouble for helping him. But Miles just shrugs it off, makes a very good point that those guys wanted a hunt. I just gave them one.
My note here is when O'Brien smiles, the angels sing.
Truly.
He gives such a full
boy.
smile, and I'm just like, I love him so much.
I love him so much. And as O'Brien turns to leave, Tosk takes a moment to wish Miles an honorable death. And the chief returns the words as Tosk departs DS9, followed closely by the hunter's ship. And Calm's delivery on the line, "Die with honor, Tosk," is an all-timer. It's so fucking good. I think it's probably the best line delivery in the entire episode. And I just love and respect so much how Calm just does such a good job hopping between tones within a single story. He's very much a guy, O'Brien is very much a guy that, like, is glib, it, like, makes jokes, but really gets the seriousness of the work that they do. And I just love him letting that seriousness come through in that line because he knows that they're saying goodbye, right? And he's not someone that is super in touch with his feelings. He's not super touchy-feely in that way, but he will let himself have a moment like that when he knows he doesn't have to deal with the consequences of it. Like, it feels very like him going to the Enterprise to say goodbye to Picard in the pilot, right? And sort of like, oh, I'm here, I'm saying goodbye, but I'm not going to bother him, like he's...
Yeah, we're not going to be emotionally vulnerable.
He loves to be stoic.
Yeah. Also, they do the heterosexual shoulder grab.
They sure do.
I'm like, you should have kissed goodbye.
Should have blown each other's backs out. That's the biggest sin of this episode.
Truly. So we cut to Ben's office where he's debriefing Miles. O'Brien attempts to make a feeble explanation for what transpired when the power grid overloaded, and then he just admits that he sabotaged the system.
Yeah.
Cisco appears furious with O'Brien. He's scolding him. He's warning not to pull a similar stunt again. And I just really love O'Brien trying to spin it. Like, how am I going to talk to Starfleet about it? And Miles like, oh, well, you could say, like, the relations of internet. And he's like, save it.
Okay, he's like, save it, but Miles is right. Like,
it's
that's the
spin.
thing that is so funny about it, where it's like,
spin.
Yeah, it's obviously not, like, in keeping with protocol by any means, but they literally, it reminds me of, so my best friend just graduated with a master's in conflict resolution, and one of the things that they talked to me about that they learned in their, like, studying negotiation is you always want to go into a negotiation making sure you're clear on what every party's want is, right? I'm sure there's like a more technical term for it that I'm not remembering, but like what their ultimate end goal is, what their perfect solution would be. And for both Tosk and the hunters, it's for the fucking hunt to continue, right? Like, none of them are happy with the fact that Tosk got caught on the station and now they have to deal with this as like a diplomatic incident. They would much rather have a reset and get to continue this very important cultural ritual, and O'Brien provides that.
He does.
So, like, frankly, I think Starfleet should be happy about that. Sure, he, like, didn't follow some orders, and sure, he technically assaulted an alien, but, like, really, at the end of the day, he gave them what they wanted, and I think that is more of an effective diplomatic strategy than what Ben was trying to do. So, I don't know. I think he has a point here. I understand why Ben doesn't want to hear it, but I think he has a point.
I love O'Brien being like, I have spin ideas. And Ben's like, absolutely fucking not.
And so before O'Brien leaves, he does have this moment where he wonders aloud, how it was that he was able to escape without encountering any security force fields. And Ben just has this line where he goes, I guess that one got by us. And goddamn, I just love Avery Brooks so much.
So good.
And as O'Brien leaves, Cisco looks extremely pleased with himself. That is something that I find fun about Cisco's leadership dynamic in this show, where there are several moments throughout where it's very clear, I think he and his crew understand that there is a certain expectation that is set by Starfleet that Ben has to adhere to. And so he will ream them out, and he will not it's not going to be like, I'm giving you a pass because I know what you did was right. Like, he will fully tell them, like, boy, you better not do that shit again, or you are going to be off of this Jiffy Lube. Like, I'm not fucking around. But they all kind of know that that's what Cisco has to say.
Yeah.
And there's a mutual understanding there that it's like, our priorities are the same. Like, the bosses are making me give you this speech. And it's not that I don't agree that you should be following my orders more, but
Obviously.
like, we get kind of what's going on here. And I love the trust that establishes. And I love Cisco as a leader.
Yeah. It's where we have to play the roles a bit.
Yeah.
And we both understand that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Also, just the whole, like, reaming Miles out reminds me of that tweet about, like, cats, where, like, you pick them up after they've done something bad, and they're like, oh, hug. And it's like, no, this is a punishment hug. Do not derive pleasure from it.
I've never seen that before. That's so good. And then we roll credits. And that is it on another episode of Deep Space Nine. Whew. What a fun one, honestly. I'm really glad to have had an opportunity to sort of take a reassessment of this episode for the podcast, because it is a lot of fun. And I read that it was Colm Meaney's favorite episode of the first season.
Really?
He really enjoyed the chance to get to work with Scott McDonald, who he thought did just like a really awesome job as Tusk. And I mean, you can see, like we've talked before about acting, there is this idea of like a generosity in a scene partner, and I think that is really excellently displayed in this episode, sort of the generosity and the give and take between Colm and Scott, and how they use that to build the dynamic between those two characters. I completely get why this felt really fun for them to work on, and also why they were really satisfied with the final product.
Absolutely, yeah. And for what we were talking about with The Most Dangerous Game.
Yeah.
So it's a 1924 short story about a big game hunter who is himself hunted on an island by a Russian aristocrat.
Yeah, and so this episode is essentially The Most Dangerous Game. It has been
space.
Yeah, it's one of those stories that just like gets retold and retold over and over again. There was like an old Hollywood movie, and since then it has been remade a million times. There's several different Star Trek episodes that are pretty direct parallels. We've got from the original series The Squire of Gothos, we've got this episode Captain Pursuit, we've got in Voyager The Killing Game, in Enterprise Rogue Planet, and then on Lower Decks we have specifically The Least Dangerous Game, which is the most explicit reference to it, but I think it's also sort of a parody of all these other episodes, and it's a fun concept. I get why people keep coming back to the well. I mentioned, I think, in our first episode that I work in public education, and one year we were reading this with our students, and so we were going along reading the short story and also watching when Quibi was a thing for the briefest of periods in like 2020 to 2021. They had a series that they made about the Most Dangerous Game, where they sort of modernized it, and the idea was that it was like the parasite billionaire class sort of like creating problems for people and then offering them this solution of like, we'll pay for your like mother's medical bills for her cancer, like whatever it is that is like putting you in a horrible predicament if you allow yourself to be hunted by these people for sport in this city. And it's like, rather than on an island, it's in like the middle of like New York or wherever it is. But it's a lot of fun. And this episode is very much like exactly that story in a way, but that added sort of texture to it, which I think is interesting because I wouldn't have gotten this, and maybe that's just, the context of it. But to get into our behind the scenes, this episode was developed essentially as a story about the morality of lack thereof of fox hunting.
That's so wild. I
Isn't
had no
it?
idea.
Yeah, so that was like I guess a really big hot button issue at the time. I don't remember that, but I was not born yet when this episode came out,
And
so.
I was like 3 years old. So.
Yeah, but apparently that was a big thing that there was a lot of like debate around. Of if I had to guess, it's the traditionalists that are like, this is a part of our culture or whatever, versus people being like, yeah, but it's fucked.
There's like 80 of you and dogs and one fox.
Yeah, and they even they have the hunters in the red outfits, which echo the classic garb of the fox hunters and all of that. But I think that's interesting because that's very much not what the Most Dangerous Game is about.
Yeah.
So to get into the Most Dangerous Game a little deeper, the idea is that this Russian aristocrat on this island has hunted all of the the best game in the world, and he has all of these trophies, and he's a very prolific hunter. And when the eventual victim of the story washes ashore on his island, they're bonding over like, you're a big game hunter too. We get the appeal of a challenging hunt, right? That is something that is sort of established as like understood at the beginning of the story. And then what the story warps is that this aristocrat on this island sort of had this realization that animals, non-sentient prey, however you want to think about it, are never going to be able to pose the satisfying challenge that someone who can truly think through the ways that they are showing up to the challenge of the hunt like a sentient being can. And so that's why he starts hunting humans for sport, basically saying that the only one that can give a challenge to a hunter like me at this point is a creature that can think through its decision making like I can, and can sort of play a hunt as almost a chess match with me, right?
A back and forth rather than one-sided.
Exactly, which is just not what fox hunting is at all. So I don't know why we conflated those two things in this story.
Yeah, it's also interesting because obviously foxes are not raised in a culture where they are proud to be the hunted ones.
No, so that's the thing where I kind of think that this episode is a great adaptation of The Most Dangerous Game and a really bad morality play about fox hunting, right? Because like we talked about, like they even have Tosk speak about like, this is something that's important to me. It matters to me to be part of this. And while I don't think that the people in The Most Dangerous Game usually are quite on like that level, there is an element of like for instance, in the Quibi adaptation, it's like, I chose to do this because I'm trying to pay my mom's fucking cancer bills. It might not be something that I'm enjoying, but I actively signed on the dotted line to be part of this. Yeah. And that's just not what the morality question about fox hunting is at all. No. And so I find that really interesting that they thought that they were like doing something with that. I guess maybe the closest parallel is the cultural import of it, right?
Yeah,
because, like,
that this is a part of our rituals and history, and
and that's why we're so loath to let it be ripped from our hands by the SJWs at PETA or whatever it was. Like it's part of. I think fox hunting is like a big, mainly a British thing, right? Or like a UK,
English
so
specifically,
like being like it's part of our dating back to the kings and queens, and it's very whatever. So I have to assume that's kind of what the approach was there. But yeah, I think it works much better as a Most Dangerous Game story. But it's also like, what did you think about the character of Tosk, I guess is my question.
Well, I don't want to get into this because it's Orb of Prophecy area. Okay. I would like to talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely have some Tosk stuff for Orb of Prophecy as well. I guess just not to belabor the point, but I think that there's something very interesting about Tosk, just with the genetic engineering component of it, of like, this is your cultural destiny, but it's something that was very much foisted on you by your culture from your birth. Like you weren't, it's more, it feels like a caste system kind of situation, right? And so anytime a caste system is part of a culture's dynamic, I'm very, very skeptical of that. And, as much as I can understand why Tosk feels a desire to fulfill this like honorable thing that he has been told his whole life, it feels still very much to me like he is being exploited as a victim in a way that he doesn't have the cultural context to like possibly be aware of.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that there's any more of a way to address that in this episode, but I think it almost makes me wish that this species would come back, because spoiler alert, we don't come back to this well, and often that's the case with these season 1 episodes, is like, this is an interesting concept, moving on.
Yeah. Which is in the vein of sort of classic not serialized track.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm not saying I want like a season long arc about the Tosk or anything, but like to really get into like, there's some more I'm going to get into in Orb of Prophecy about this, but I'll say I had a question about like, were these people that were like embryos or babies or something that already existed that were then modified, or were they created in a vacuum? And like, does that impact the morality of it? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you made a good point about how when the hunter takes off his helmet, he looks like Tosk.
Yeah.
Like they have the same nose, nostril areas, same shape, structure. And so are the Tosks genetically engineered from the hunter species?
Right. Are they the same species?
Yeah.
In root DNA terms?
Yeah. Which definitely would have impact on the morality of it all.
Yeah. But I mean, it feels like it should, but also at the same time, like them being of a different species doesn't make the exploitation more justifiable. It just
no, that's true. Yeah.
It makes it more like feel more fucked up, I guess, on an emotional level, right?
It's fucked up either way. It's more fucked up if you created it from yourself and then hunt it.
Yeah. So lots of things to think about there. Since we're already sort of like moving towards it, we'll get into our behind the scenes section. Yes. A couple of things I just wanted to highlight were that Tosk, played by Scott McDonald here in his first ever TV role, which I think is very cool, would go on to have a big future with Trek. He played the Romulan operative Nivek on TNG. He played Ensign Rollins in the pilot for Star Trek Voyager, a character called Garanagar later in Deep Space Nine. And he had his most recurring role as the Xindi reptilian antagonist character Dolem on Star Trek Enterprise.
I love that for him.
Yeah, so he's a big Trek veteran, and one thing that I just thought was really interesting to read about when I was doing research on this episode was that he only appeared once as the Romulan character Nivek on TNG, but he was set to have appeared 7 more times as this character in what would have been a long-running arc featuring Leonard Nimoy as Spock in TNG in a Romulan Vulcan unification arc. And instead, we fans will know that we obviously do get unification parts 1 and 2 of TNG, which feature Spock and are some of the best episodes of TNG. But apparently this was supposed to be a much longer sort of serialized arc that didn't end up happening because of friction between Leonard Nimoy and Rick Berman, who was like the producer essentially responsible for everything bad that has ever happened in
Rick
Star
Berman,
Trek.
this is a Rick Berman hate space.
Yes, like not to be overly reductive, because like everybody makes mistakes, everybody has those days, but like I personally feel comfortable assigning everything bad about Star Trek to Rick Berman.
I want to fight him in a Denny's
Dude
parking
just seems
lot.
like an absolute disgusting sleaze to be
just
so
want to fight
real.
him so bad.
And so there are numerous times that's going to come up in the future discussions of Deep Space Nine. And honestly, a lot of the reason why Deep Space Nine is allowed to be so good is because Rick Berman was focusing on TNG up until the end of TNG, and then immediately pivoted into focusing on Voyager, which was launching at that point. So DS9 was like one of the few things that like didn't have his like evil eye of Sauron on it at all times. But that was something that would have been so fucking cool. But I guess he couldn't stop being a jerk, because like we know Leonard Nimoy's a good guy, so like we know that that's not what that was.
No, it's not on him.
So I just wanted to note that. I thought that was really interesting. And then also the makeup for Tosk and for the Hunter characters won the show an Emmy Award for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Makeup, which I thought was so well deserved. Really cool. And the looks were actually displayed in a case at the Paramount offices in Hollywood, according to actor Garrett Graham, which I also think like walking into the studio and just seeing like a Tosk would have been like, I hope he had like his karate hands out and like
he's in his fight pose.
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, we can move into our design corner where we talk about set, costume, sound, etc.
Yeah, please.
And yeah, the Tosk makeup, his outfit, so good.
Killer, so good. I think not only is the attention to granular detail on the Tosk makeup incredible, but I just want to reiterate the note that I observed that when the Hunter takes off his helmet, they don't look much like Tosk, but they have the same nose nostril shape. And so to me, this is a storytelling bit that's like, the Tosk were probably genetically engineered from members of the Hunter's own species rather than created as an entirely new artificial species. And that does feel like it has implications for the morality, right? And so just the fact that the designers were thinking about that, like everyone who works on a production like this is a storyteller. And I love when we can highlight moments of like, here a production design moment actively contributed to the story we were telling. And you can see that. And I just love that.
That's great. Yeah. You also mentioned the Hunter's outfit.
Yeah, I really love the Hunter's outfits.
It's giving TOS
in
a good way.
Yeah.
Like, we love a bright color. We love some sparkly shit.
They're definitely a bit corny, but like the red bodysuits are just so striking. I love how they evoke the fox hunting garb. I think that that's a good, even if it doesn't quite work as a metaphor, like the visual reference is striking, right? And they also create a uniform look for all the Hunters in a way that's fun. The helmets are my one quibble. They don't look quite as good as the bodysuits, but they're fun, and they definitely look like undersea supervillains, which is great.
So this isn't design corner, but I wanted to kind of put a question to you.
Okay.
The Hunters and Tosk talk about honor.
Yeah.
And, to die an honorable death, to, this honorable, role where we honor the prey, basically, and blah, 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 honor.
Yeah.
And, of course, that brings in mind Klingons, who are also obsessed with honor.
Sure.
And I'm trying to remember, do we ever see the Klingons kind of having, like, this kind of game? Or, like,
no.
Do you think they would say, like, would they consider this setup honorable?
That's very interesting. I like started to answer, but I'm like, I need to think about it for a second, because what Klingons consider honorable is so subjective, and like we will get into this as Klingons show up more on the show, but like it very much, as with all like real world human ideologies, is a thing that like anybody can project anything onto, right? And so you have a lot of moments where like honor is used politically to position certain people as like, well, you can't do that, that's dishonorable, like blah blah blah. I find it hard to imagine the Klingons engaging in a ritual like this for a couple reasons. One, the stated purpose being entertainment, I think, is something that is not in line with how they view their culture and like the goals of their culture. I think that they're seeking honor, right? And like whether or not the hunt is fun is not something that is like important to their sense of honor. And then building on that, I think this idea that like we need a prey that provides us with a genuine challenge, I don't know if I see the Klingons being interested in that in such a way where they would like get into like genetic engineering and
Yeah.
like all of that. Like I do see like, oh, let's go after like increasingly large like monsters and shit that like happen to exist, right? But I don't know that I see them like being like, we need someone who is going to like outsmart us that we're gonna hunt, right? Like I think
True.
for them it's like the hunt is the hunt because it is a chance to use our skills and be in camaraderie with one another and put food on the table and like all of these things, but it's not a game to them. And so I do see that as sort of fundamental differences, but I would really like to hear your take if you see it differently, if you feel like they would, because I think there's a lot of room for interpretation there.
Yeah, I think I mostly agree with you. I don't see the Klingons doing something like this. I think they would say that it is not honorable to create a species just to be hunted. I think they would feel it would be dishonorable to, because like the Klingons fight each other, right?
Yeah.
Like, and everybody has the same chance theoretically
Yeah.
to become a warrior, to, you know, build their
Absolutely.
reputation, build their, and so
We know that the Klingons do have something of a caste system, but
Yeah,
it is
like-
not completely rigid. There is a character
Yeah.
later who's very high up in military command who we learn starts in like a low-born position and
Yeah.
works his way up. So it is something that, yes, you're right. Like that's not how they see social stratification. It's not an immovable thing.
yeah, and it's not, we're not saying the Klingons are an egalitarian
No,
society.
no.
But I think they would feel that like that would be unfair and
Dishonorable.
So
Yeah,
dishonorable.
yeah,
But
I
I just,
agree.
you know, you mentioned honor in Star Trek, and of course I'm going to start thinking about Klingons.
Totally, right. Well, and I think that they would have a hard time like engaging with Tosk in a way where it's like, sure, you and I might be able to acknowledge in a vacuum that he was born and bred for this and like, you know, culturally, like this is what's important to him and all of that. But I think they would sort of look at him as like a living, breathing creature who like doesn't really have a sense of honor in that he's not willing to like fight for his own survival. He's just existing for the satisfaction of others. And like, they don't really have the same kind of cultural sense around empathy where like, I don't think the first thing for them would be like, oh, it's tragic that someone did this to you. It
No.
would be like, oh, your life is tragic because it lacks honor. And like, I view you in like a negative light because of that, you know? So.
Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to,
Yeah,
it crossed my mind and I was like, "Ooh, I'd like to hear Jamie's thoughts on
Very
this."
interesting question. I'm so glad you brought it up. Alrighty, well, that is us for this week. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode and our discussion of Captive Pursuit.
Yes. We have one final segment left in today's episode, a little something we like to call Consulting the Orb of Prophecy, where we look ahead into the future of the series and discuss spoilers that relate to this week's episode.
If you've watched Deep Space Nine before, or you just don't mind spoilers, stick around after we sign off for that discussion. If you're watching along with us for the first time and don't want to be spoiled for future episodes, you're going to want to hop off after the sign-off.
The Star Trek Deep Space Nine Parmont cast is recorded in San Diego, California, and produced by us, as well as our Lieutenant Commander, Peter.
A big thanks to friend of the show, Matt, who produced our theme music, and to Tumblr user at GrandCon221B, whose Star Trek pit crew was used to generate the avatars of us featured in the show's cover art.
New episodes drop every week on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
If you have any questions, comments, or would like to chat with us about Star Trek, you can email us at ds9cast@gmail.com.
You can also find us on Instagram and Twitter at ParamountCast for updates and memes.
Last but not least, if you're enjoying the show, please review and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. It really, really helps other folks to find the show. And please join us next week for our discussion of Deep Space Nine Season 1, Episode 6, Q-less.
Oh, yeah.
Bye. We'll see you next time. Welcome to Consulting the Orb of Prophecy, a little segment where we get non-linear up in the wormhole. Da, 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 da. So So, today we are talking about spoilers from Captive Pursuit and how that spans out into the future of Deep Space Nine. Steph, what do you got for us today?
Destined that we were always destined to take.
The road never less traveled until we did.
Jem'Hadar. Like, immediately was like, oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so Tosk's genetic engineering, and specifically his ability to become invisible, is just extremely reminiscent of the Jem'Hadar, who are the soldier characters of the Dominion, which we are going to learn about in Season 3 and will become, like, staples of the show at that point. Writer Robert Hewitt Wolfe mentioned that it was his intention that, quote, the same people who bred the Tosks as gifts to the Hunters breed the Jem'Hadar as well. So
that's fascinating.
It's really fascinating. That line never makes it onto the screen, so it is apocrypha, but I think it's also never contradicted, so there's no reason to not view it as canon. Some form of canon. And honestly, one of the things I find the most interesting about that is the line that the same people who bred the Tosks as gifts to the Hunters bred the Jem'Hadar as well. The idea that they were not the ones doing the genetic engineering. Because that really changes the moral calculus, right? I mean, I don't think that it makes what they're doing any less abusive to Tosk or any less, you know, sort of playing God in the way that they, like, take these people and institutionalize them as, like, perhaps not lower status, but of just a different status with different human rights than the main species living on that planet. It just is really fascinating to think about, like, was it the founders?
I was about to say, because who breeds the Jem'Hadar?
Because then you have to think about, like, all right, what is the purpose in terms of, like, population control, in terms of giving them this gift of the Tosk, right? Is there some sort of loyalty between the Hunters and the Dominion? Do they serve some sort of role as members of the Dominion that earned them this gift of these genetically engineered bitches? Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating in terms of exploring that world building and that context. Yeah, what really stood out to me is, you know, the way that Tosk is like, this is the role that I, you know, exist for. And it's so reminiscent of the Jem'Hadar.
Yes.
And
of their internal conflict with the fact that, like, they were bred for a specific purpose and it's part of their DNA.
Yeah, literally, like, built into them.
Yeah.
And
we never really get into that in this episode. It's actually more, I think, implied that it's cultural conditioning that make the Tosk feel the way that they do.
Yes.
But what if it is genetic conditioning?
Like the Jem'Hadar,
what if there is something in their blood that tells them, like, I am prey, I must run, and they could never be happy in another life because they were designed to not be able to be? Does that change the moral calculus? I almost think maybe it does, because is it wrong to do something to someone that is the only thing that makes them happy, right? Like, that's very complicated if that's the case.
Yeah, it is.
I also just wanted to know, additionally, I know that you haven't watched this one yet, Steph, but it reminded me of in Star Trek Enterprise in Season 1, we get the Suliban, who are a race that are similar in design to the Tosk. They are like a reptilian sort of green, like humanoid situation, but they are also subjects of genetic engineering and have like, I can like camouflage myself, and like they have some other things that they can do. But I wonder if the Suliban were sort of inspired by the take on the Tosk and the Jem'Hadar. It feels like a very sort of a through line, and the fact that our Tosk actor was a major recurring antagonist on Enterprise. I just, I'm seeing it laid out before me. I'm doing like the math woman.
I've connected the dots.
Exactly.
You haven't connected shit. Exactly. I've connected them.
Yeah, for sure. And then just the implication that the first Gamma Quadrant race that Starfleet makes contact with is perhaps intimately connected to the Founders and the Dominion in some way is very interesting, right? Because we won't get more of that for another full couple seasons. But once you know that the Dominion are there and have been in the background this whole time, it makes you want to go back and be like, what of these races that were being bad hotel guests in space like may have had a connection to the changelings? And yeah,
there's so much in there that we don't know.
I am very much looking forward to, in future prophecy segments, sort of building out like a headcanon of like potential mythology for the Gamma Quadrant before we're actually really getting into all of the Dominion stuff, because
I'm down.
There's a lot of races that we're going to meet that it's like, if you've been living in the Gamma Quadrant this long, you must have had encounters with the Dominion, right?
Yeah.
So like, what did that look like?
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you would like to add before we hop off, Steph?
That's it. I had a good time with this one, I have to say.
Me too. I hope you guys all join us next time for some more good times.
Yes, thank you all for listening.
Bye.
Bye.